A few years ago, I made a short video about a French-Canadian series called Série Noire, created by François Letourneau and Jean-François Rivard. To recap briefly, I called the show great and said it was absolutely worth watching and reviewing, but due to English subtitles being elusive after it left Canadian Netflix, I wasn't able to give the show the proper analysis it deserved. This has now thankfully been rectified due to English subtitles being discovered by members of the OK Fine Be That Way community, who contacted me via Twitter and Discord. I cannot thank you enough for the support which has helped this task become a reality. Stay awesome, guys, and if you need help tracking it down as well, like I said, Twitter and Discord. Links in the description. Now it's time for me to finally pay my debts and properly delve into this amazing show. Série Noire follows two television show writers, Denis and Patrick, who together are working on a critically lambasted but highly watched program called Justice's Law. When the series is renewed for a second season, the two are initially dismayed to be stuck on the project until Dennis comes up with an experimental idea. In order to write the show more authentically, the duo will start breaking the law in order to better understand the mindset of criminality. Things only escalate from there as Patrick and Denis become heavily involved with Montreal's criminal underworld and find themselves in wackier and more dangerous situations than they were anticipating. I really have to highlight that premise because going into the show, that description on Netflix was all I had to work with. I never heard anyone talk about Série Noire before or since I saw it, and as far as I know, I'm the only person outside of its home province who has seen the series, possibly ever. In fact, on my original video, a lot of the comments I received were from people saying how surprised they were that anyone outside of Quebec had seen Série Noire. That is a damn shame because believe me when I say that this absolute masterpiece of television deserves to be viewed all around not only Canada, but the entire world. I've championed a lot of shows on this channel that I believe are deserving of a much wider audience than they currently have, so I'm not mincing my words when I say that Série Noire may be the most underrated television show I've ever seen. Série Noire is actually my first introduction to the French-Canadian television industry. Being both Canadian and a huge film guy, I was well aware that Quebec has produced a lot of great movies such as Mommy, Incendé, and a lot more that I have yet to see, but this was the first time I ever checked out a Quebecois show, as they're apparently called. Luckily, I think Série Noire is a fantastic introduction to that world, not only because it's phenomenal, but also because it delves into and comments on Quebec's television industry itself. Whoever's in charge of the TV distribution in Quebec needs to find a way to get their shit more widely accessible, because if any of it is half as good as what I just saw, the rest of the world is sorely missing out. I would label Série Noire as a dark comedy crime thriller that's as intense as it is hilarious. In my original video, I described the show as kind of being a cross between Breaking Bad and Spaced, and while I do stand by that comparison, there are other parallels I can make to things I love. It has the sharp dialogue and meta-commentary on the television industry like the movie Network, the mix of violence and humor of a Tarantino flick, the immaculately filmed use of its landscape that you'd see in classic westerns or samurai films, the examination of nerd culture you'd see in many Edgar Wright projects beyond Spaced, and the brilliant tension and subversion of expectations you'd find in a Hitchcock movie. Any comparison I make is only with the utmost respect, and in the midst of all that, Série Noire manages to become something completely unique and original. While the focus of the show is almost always on the main duo of Patrick and Denis, there are so many branching storylines here that go in a million different directions. There are twists, turns, reveals, backstories, rising stakes, new characters that get introduced and developed late into the game, characters from the beginning of the series who have the context of who they are completely flipped on their heads, big elaborate schemes, small realistic human drama. You name it, Série Noire delivers it. A lot of the humor here is very meta due to the fact that it's a television show about two writers who are making a television show, and their situations often mirror what they are writing. There's an extra layer of meta-ness on top of that when you realize that the show's co-creator, François Letourneau, is starring as one of the two leads and coming up with ideas not only for his actual show, but for Denis to put into his show within the show. I have no idea if what I said makes a lick of sense, so bear with me. The premise makes me wonder if François Letourneau and Jean-François Rivard were commissioned to write a crime thriller series, and not knowing much about that world, decided to make it about writers who also don't know much about that world. I admit that's speculation, but it adds a new meaning to the phrase, write what you know. I love great meta humor, but unfortunately, particularly nowadays, I see it done poorly more often than not. Serie Noire, without any sort of exaggeration, is one of the best uses of that type of comedy I've ever seen. The actors in Serie Noire don't have to do a constant wink wink nudge nudge to the camera in order to get their humor across, nor are they explaining the joke or continually talking about how their situation reminds them of a movie. Granted, there's a little bit of that, but even in those instances, it comes out naturally due to Patrick and Denis being big movie nerds and equating what they're experiencing to media. It never crosses the line of being overbearing or gets to the point where anyone is defined as simply being catchphrase dispensers. To give an example of what I'm talking about without spoiling anything, one trope that I can't stand in bad meta humor is when a character will talk about how a certain situation is a cliche or lazy writing, and then they go ahead and do it anyway under the pretense of, "Hey, I just said it was lazy, so you can't call it out for being lame." In Serie Noire, there are a lot of moments where they point out cliche writing tropes and then something along those lines will happen, but even in those moments, it will lead to a bigger twist or go in a lot deeper than the surface level of said trope. Therefore, when something like that happens within the show, it's used less as an immunity from criticism and more as a demonstration on how to take a familiar scenario and build upon it so it works with a new twist and unique voice. It's not just meta humor though. There's a wide variety of comedy on display here. You have referential jokes, sex jokes, character-based jokes, controversial humor, visual humor, physical comedy, hilariously over-the-top violence. Pretty much anything and everything is brought to the table, and essentially all of it lands. And even with the show being as hysterical as it is, not once does that even remotely take away from its tension, macabre themes, and occasionally gut-wrenching imagery. The directing and cinematography are so well done and emphasize the character's fear and anxiety during the moments where something insane is happening. This is the type of show where actions lead to consequences that lead to bigger actions, which lead to more dire consequences, so on and so forth. What might seem like an unimportant detail is often part of a much larger plotline than the audience could have ever anticipated. The thrilling moments have a lot of variety to them too. Sometimes, an argument between a husband and wife can keep you on the edge of your seat as much as a bomb going off. Like many other shows and movies with great dialogue, Deadwood, I'm looking at you, the small conversational scenes are sometimes more heart-pounding than the big action sequences, even when the action is done very well. There's a strong mix of personal relationship drama, professional drama regarding the characters' careers, and life-threatening circumstances that take things to a whole new level. Let's talk about the characters in the series. First of all, we have Patrick and Denis, our two leads. Denis, as previously stated, is played by series co-creator François Letourneau, and Patrick is played by Vincent Guillaume Otis, both of whom do an outstanding job at portraying their characters. Given the changing tone of the show, the two main actors do need a lot of range for them to work in grounded and over-the-top situations, both of which they pull off sometimes simultaneously. Patrick and Denis are very relatable and likable, despite the fact they do some pretty heinous and downright ridiculous things that put them and the people around them in danger. You're not necessarily rooting for them to continue their experiment, since it's a pretty bad idea in the first place, but at the same time, you don't want to see them get killed in the process either. They may be in over their heads, but being television writers, problem solving and figuring their ways out of life-threatening situations is kind of part of their job. Their level of intelligence in certain areas is perfectly balanced with their level of ineptitude in other areas, which is not always an easy line to walk. One thing that differentiates Serie Noire with something like Breaking Bad or The Godfather is that when the characters enter the criminal world in those stories, it changes them into being immoral kingpins that grow to be very efficient at their given roles. While Patrick and Denis definitely have development and arcs which change them, there's never any sort of indication that they truly belong and are comfortable in the situation or world that they are inhabiting, which I think is a more realistic take for the average person finding themselves in their positions. The supporting cast includes Denis' wife Judith and their daughter Juliette. Based on what I understand about the premises of François Letourneau and Jean-François Rivard's other shows, this team really likes writing stories about dysfunctional family dynamics, particularly couples who are at their wits' end in a relationship, and how that influences them to spice up their lives in unconventional and often dangerous ways. That is definitely present within Serie Noire, with Denis and Judith being constantly at odds with each other, whether that be regarding their own safety, their relationship with their child, or infidelity that's happening right in front of the other person. On the other hand, There are plenty of times where they end up willingly working together, which leads to them either forming a strange bond or creating a greater rift between them, depending on how a situation turns out. Judith is a great and complicated character who had a lot more depth than I was originally expecting. Their daughter, Juliet, also manages to be extremely well defined. Like many people, I have problems with a lot of child characters in movies and television, mostly due to the fact that they aren't really meant to be compelling and are often used as props for conflict. Absolutely not the case here. Not only does the young actress do a great job at playing Juliet, but the character adds a great added dimension to the family drama. She's fully upfront about the fact that her parents' marriage is failing, and Denis and Judith often make the mistake of underestimating how aware she truly is. She also has a very interesting relationship with another character I'll get to later, who often gives her the kindness and support she lacks from her own family. When it comes to the other supporting characters, there are two different sides to the cast. We have the people involved with the television industry, such as the main duo's producer, broadcaster, actors, and rival writers, one of which being Patrick's ex. On the other side of things, we have people involved in the criminal underworld, such as gangsters, prostitutes, shady congressmen, hitmen, and cops. Some of the more notable characters include a prostitute named Charlene, Patrick's romantic interest, who ends up being one of the duo's biggest introductions into the criminal underworld. She sort of blurs the lines between two archetypes, those being a hooker with a heart of gold and a femme fatale who cannot be trusted. Her arc goes in a very strange direction, which makes her one of the more intriguing aspects of the show as a whole. We also have Detective Christian Perez, who kind of knows what Denis and Patrick are up to, and keeps tabs on them from a distance. There's Louise, the loudmouth producer who Patrick and Denis work with on a professional level, Jean Guy, an actor on Justice's Law who also gets wrapped up in the writing experiment in his own way, Claudio, a dangerous but moronic gangster who is hilarious and intimidating, Bruno, a gangster associated with Claudio who has a very strange and integral role, and the broadcaster, who is very corrupt in his own way, especially when it comes to the decisions he makes for the network. As the series progresses, the two opposing worlds become much more interwoven, with characters you never expected to share screen time together, overlapping at every turn. I'm not going to reveal anything, but especially near the end of Serie Noire's 2-season run, we get some big twists that I never saw coming from a mile away. The show also uses a narrator at some points, especially in the first season during the opening of episodes. Narration is something that can either succeed or fail depending on its use, and here, it works tremendously because it's used sparingly and doesn't treat the audience like idiots. The narration at times is also very funny. Although I don't speak French, Bernard Derome, the person who does the narration, is so consistently serious in his tone of voice that it makes for a great contrast when he's talking about things like exploding cocks. And yes, that's all the context I'm giving you about that. But by far my favorite character on the show is Mark Arkand, played by Mark Beaupré. Mark Arkand is a deranged, violent psychopath who seeks out Denis and Patrick due to them coincidentally having a minor character in their show also named Mark Arkand. Believing the character to be based on him, the real Mark Arkand demands that the writers make the second season about the Mark Arkand character's redemption, using his own experiences as a template. Mark Arkand is not associated with the gangsters in the show, but his violent past has led him to getting into legal trouble previously. Still, his efficiency in combat makes him come across as an even bigger threat than the entire criminal organization combined. Mark Arkand is terrifying, hilarious, delusional, clever, and on rare occasions, sympathetic. He often threatens Denis and Patrick with violence if they do not abide by what he wants, while also acting as a bodyguard for them from people who mean them harm. Even when he seems to be putting Denis and Patrick in horrible situations, he often does it under the guise that it will help them make their show better or lead to stronger connections, which it often does. Arkand particularly gravitates towards Denis and gets involved with his family situations, developing a strange quote-unquote friendship with Juliet, who he always treats with respect and kindness. This does show a certain level of redemptive qualities in him, especially when Juliet feels the tension between her parents and needs someone in who she can confide her feelings. It's very sweet on the surface, but then again, you have to wonder if Mark Arkand is being genuine with Juliet, or if he's using her to get into her parents' head. Or both. The show pulls you in both directions, making you think something in one moment and the opposite thing in the next moment. Mark Arkand is by far the most dynamic, complicated, and flat-out entertaining character, which perpetuates him to being easily the best part of the show that already has so many great elements to it. There are plenty more faces that pop up that I didn't get to, but to describe more may lead to spoiler territory. What I can say is, whether a character is in one episode or the entire series from beginning to end, every single one of them manages to be fun, engaging, and has an important role to play that enhances the story. The relationship between the characters also changed quite drastically, sometimes over the course of a season, and sometimes within the same episode. One moment a character can be saving the life of another character, and the very next minute, they could be holding each other at gunpoint. Your partner can turn out to be your sworn enemy, and who you thought was a threat to your life can end up being your biggest protection. Now let's talk about the atmosphere of the show. Série Noire takes place in Montreal, and as anyone who's been there can tell you, the city has a very unique vibe due to its distinct architecture, French and English influence, vibrant communities, and being one of the biggest commercial capitals in all of Canada. The reason I bring this up is because Série Noire isn't a show that just so happens to be set in Montreal. The city itself plays a huge part in telling the story, as it delves into the entertainment industry, politics, underworld, police force, and lifestyle of middle-class residents. The weather itself plays a huge role in the show too. Shot and set during wintertime, the dark, freezing atmosphere, particularly during the nighttime scenes, really gives the feeling of an unsettling and isolating tone that perfectly represents the story that's being told. In the same way that Breaking Bad made Albuquerque out to be a hot, blazing desert landscape, Série Noire makes Montreal into a cold, unforgiving wasteland where at any point, the soft white snow could be contaminated by gushing red blood. A lot of Canadian shows tend to avoid shooting in the winter time if they can help it, because filming conditions are much harsher.
You know what?
Not one of my best moves.
Let's talk about shooting shows in the winter. Shooting shows in the winter sucks fucking mega ass. It really does.
This was the coldest night of shooting ever.
Yeah, remember I went crazy and I honked the horn over and over?
20 below. It was so cold. And I was in high heels.
Not only does Série Noire not avoid shooting in the winter, but it goes out of its way to write the premise during the season and uses it in a way that adds to its story and atmosphere. I'm so very used to Hollywood shows and movies that use snow machines for certain shots, sometimes convincingly and sometimes not. With something like Série Noire though, there's absolutely no doubt in your mind that it was filmed in the harsh conditions that it portrays on screen, and it probably led to some very difficult shoots for the actors and crew. It's quite admirable. It should be noted that every single episode of the show is directed by its co-creator, Jean-François Rivard, who deserves just as much credit as François Letourneau does. From a completely visual standpoint, this is one of the best looking shows of its kind, especially for something so underground and relatively low budget. Watching Série Noire a second time for this video has made me notice so many things in the foreground or background that were either foreshadowing upcoming events or act as great symbolism. I can honestly see Série Noire playing in movies theaters without much of a hitch. The directing really is that top notch and makes me wonder what Rivard would be capable of with access to a higher budget. The music in the show was composed by Chilean-born, Montreal-based musician Cristobal Tapia de Vir. And I just want to make a point right now that I apologize for all the pronunciations in this video. Vir is probably best known for composing the music for Smile 1 and 2, which despite not being necessarily fantastic movies, did have awesome scores. Beyond that, he also composed the music for the cult British television show Utopia, American anthology series The White Lotus, and the first season of Dirk Gently's holistic detective agency. It's nice to see that at least one member of Série Noire's crew seems to be building up a very strong portfolio for himself that expands to different projects all around the world. I bring this up because a big part of what makes Série Noire work is its amazing composition, which is dark, moody, atmospheric, and enhances every scene without using the score as a crutch. Don't take my word for it though. I have no doubt that I've been playing music from Série Noire in the background of this video, and seriously, just listen to this shit and tell me it's not amazing. It might be one of the best OSTs to any television show I've ever heard. I was able to find 5 teaser tracks from Série Noire on SoundCloud, which I'll link in the description of this video. Thank me later. One thing for sure is that from the writing, to the acting, to the directing, to the cinematography, to the score, Série Noire is immaculately made from start to finish. I really can't even think of that many flaws I could point to over the course of its entire 22 episode run. About the only thing that I can come up with is that the ending of the series seemed a little bit rushed. Kind of like they had ideas for a third season, but had to fit it into a quick epilogue in the last few minutes of the final episode. Still, I did find the conclusion to be mostly satisfying in terms of the characters' fates, so honestly even that gripe is me grasping at straws. If you, like most people, have not seen or heard of Serie Noire before, it receives my absolute highest recommendation. I said it before, but it really is a shame that the show is so buried and underground. Perhaps Francois Letourneau could make an English language movie to get more eyes on his stuff, similar to what Denis Villeneuve and Jean-Marc Vallée did. That's not me saying that I want him to go the full Hollywood route, because the way Letourneau uses Quebec as his setting really adds to his projects. Hell, Montreal is a bilingual city, so it's not like he even needs to change his environment in order to make an English language movie that makes sense. I have heard equally great things about Francois Letourneau and Jean-François Rivard's other series, Les Invincibles and Happily Married, which I haven't seen as of the time of this writing. Happily Married is available to watch on CBC Gem with English subtitles, so I can guarantee that you'll see me make a video about that show at some point in the future. Les Invincibles seems to be much harder to track down, especially with English subtitles, so I can't make any promises about that one yet. I'm also aware that Letourneau wrote and starred in a 2006 movie called Cheech, based on a play that he wrote, but I don't even know where to begin searching for that. However, if you've seen my continued coverage of Nobuhiko Obayashi's content, you know I'm up for a challenge. Reach out if you know how to help in any way. There is one other piece of unfinished business before I end things here. I made a half-joking promise in my original Serie Noire video that if I ever found subtitles for this show, I would also review the 1979 movie that happens to share the name Serie Noire. I am going to cover that film with my co-host on the Unrealistic Elephant podcast, which I will link in the description once it's finally out. Voila! I'm a man of my word. Regardless of how the film turns out to be, I can safely say that the TV show Serie Noire, which is completely unrelated to the film for clarity's sake, is a masterpiece that is worthy of your time and attention. Check it out, spread it around, and to quote another French Canadian from one of my favorite series, have people hear the word. Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to donate to our channel, follow the links in the video description to donate on Patreon or PayPal. You can also send us money via Super Chats on any of the videos. Also join our Discord server to talk to me and our other subscribers. If you feel so inclined, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share for more videos. This video falls under fair use as a commentary. Until next time, au revoir.